Dr. Buck Ruxton kept his surgery at number 2 Dalton Square, on the northern side of the finest open space in Lancaster. From his front windows, he could see the Queen Victoria Monument in the middle of the square, and beyond it, the great Baroque town hall that Lord Ashton had given the town, opened in 1909. He could also see, across the same square, the Lancaster police station. Half of working Lancaster passed through his door, and many of them called him the poor man's friend, because he treated those who could not pay. In September of 1935, he killed 2 women inside that house, in sight of the police who would arrest him, and then he tried to take them apart so completely that no one on earth could say who they had been. Lancaster, in the 1930s, was a county town of some 50,000 people in the northwest of England. Its money came from the Williamson linoleum works, and its dignity from the town hall and the square. Dalton Square itself was laid out over the site of a medieval Dominican friary, an elegant Georgian centre to a busy northern town. Number 2 sat on the north side, a handsome townhouse that was both a family home and a doctor's practice. The committal proceedings in this case would later be heard in the town hall courtroom, almost directly opposite Ruxton's own windows. Everything that mattered in the story happened within a few hundred yards of that square. The man who lived at number 2 had been born Bukhtiar Rustomji Ratanji Hakim in Bombay on the 21st of March, 1899, into a Parsi family. He studied medicine in India and later in Edinburgh and London, and he anglicised his name to Buck Ruxton after settling in Britain. He was clever, hard-working and popular with his patients. He was also, as the coming months would show, a jealous and violent man, and the newspaper coverage he attracted, both before and after his arrest, was heavily and deliberately racialized, in a way that says a great deal about the England of the time. That prejudice is part of the record of the case. It is not the reason for anything that follows. The woman known throughout Lancaster as Mrs. Ruxton had been born Isabella Kerr at Camelon, near Falkirk, in 1901, one of 5 children, and brought up in Whitburn in West Lothian. In 1920, she married a Dutch merchant seaman named Van S. The marriage failed quickly. She reverted to her own name and in time divorced. She worked as the manageress of a cafe in Edinburgh, and it was there that she met Ruxton. She was a striking, capable woman. She gambled. She hoped one day to run her own betting agency, and, unusually for a woman of her class and her time, she drove her own car. She and Ruxton never married, but she called herself Mrs. Ruxton, and he called her Belle, and together they had 3 children, born across the early 1930s. The relationship was not a peaceful one. There had been violence in the house, and Isabella had made attempts on her own life. These things are on the record, and they map the shape of the household. Buck Ruxton was consumed by the conviction, never supported by any evidence, that Isabella was unfaithful to him. She was 34 years old. The other woman in the house was 20 years old, and her name was Mary Jane Rogerson. She came from Morecambe, a few miles up the coast, and she worked as nursemaid and housekeeper to the 3 Ruxton children. She was fond of them, and they of her. Her mother was Jessie Rogerson. In the summer of 1935, Mary had spent part of the season in the Lake District with a family friend, a Mrs. Home, who had sent her home with a bundle of second-hand children's clothes, among them a romper suit meant for Ruxton's small son. Neither the clothes nor the woman who carried them home could have meant anything to anyone outside that household. Both would become evidence in a murder trial. On Saturday, the 14th of September, 1935, Isabella drove to Blackpool to see the illuminations. She returned to Dalton Square late that night, at about 11:30. What passed between her and Ruxton in the hours after she came home was never witnessed and never fully explained. But before the night was over, Isabella Ruxton was dead, strangled in her own house. Mary Rogerson, who either saw the killing or walked into what came after it, was killed too. Because Isabella came home so late, and because the killings ran on past midnight, the record gives both the 14th and the 15th of September. When the case came to be charged, the indictment did not try to fix the hour. It alleged murder on a day between the 14th and the 29th of September, 1935. What Ruxton did over the following days set this case apart from almost every other murder of its age. He was a trained anatomist, and he used that training. Somewhere in the house, most probably the upstairs bathroom, the two bodies were dismembered and drained of blood. More than that, they were mutilated with purpose. Fingertips were cut away, so there could be no prints. Teeth were removed, so there could be no dental match. Eyes, ears, a nose, features that a neighbor or a sister might recognize, were taken off. The precision of the work would later tell the men who examined the remains that whoever did this knew how a human body was put together. The parts were wrapped in whatever the house could supply: newspaper, pillowcases, bed sheets, a blouse, a child's romper suit. While the parcels sat in the house, Ruxton set about explaining the silence. He sent his charwoman, Mrs. Agnes Oxley, away with an excuse so that she would not come into work. He told Mary's parents that their daughter had got herself into trouble and gone away. He told others that Isabella had left him for another man. He was seen burning material in the yard behind the house. And on the 17th of September, driving south from the direction of Scotland, he knocked a cyclist from his bicycle at Kendal at 1:45 in the afternoon. The constable who dealt with it noted that the doctor was wildly agitated and that both of his hands were bandaged. The unravelling began 100 miles to the north on the morning of Sunday, the 29th of September. A young woman named Susan Haynes Johnson was on holiday at Moffat in Dumfriesshire and was walking along a road that crossed a steep, wooded ravine called Gardenholme Lynn, a tributary of the River Annan about 2 miles out of the town. The name is also written Gardenholme Lynn and appears that way even in the official file. Looking down from the bridge into the stream below, she saw a bundle caught against a boulder, and from the bundle an object she could not at first place. It was a human arm. She fetched her brother. He climbed down and confirmed what she had seen, and the police were called. Sergeant Robert Sloane of Moffat came out and secured the place. Over the following days the ravine was searched, and it gave up its secrets a piece at a time. Around 30 wrapped parcels were recovered from the Lynn and its banks. Inside them were something in the order of 70 separate portions of 2 human bodies. The parcels and the parts are 2 different counts, and it is worth keeping them apart. The newspapers reached for a name, as newspapers do. First they called it The Bodies Under the Bridge, then The Ravine Murder. And then, once the country understood what the men in the laboratories were being asked to do, they called it The Jigsaw Murders. Because the remains had been found in Scotland, the investigation began under Scottish authority. Dumfriesshire Police, under their Chief Constable, William Black, called in Glasgow CID, and Detective Lieutenants William Ewing and Bertie Hammond travelled to Moffat. The remains themselves went to the Department of Forensic Medicine at the University of Edinburgh, and there the case entered the hands of the men who would make it famous. Professor John Glaister the Younger, Regius Professor of Forensic Medicine at Glasgow, Professor James Cooper Brash, the anatomist at Edinburgh, and Professor Sidney Smith, working alongside them. Detective Constable Thomas Stobie photographed every stage of the work. Their first task was the hardest to imagine. From 70 pieces, they had to build back 2 people. They separated the remains into 2 individuals, and they labelled them without names. Body number 1, body number 2. The reassembly told them a great deal on its own. The cutting was skilled. Whoever had done it had known where the joints lay and how to take them apart, which pointed away from a labourer or a butcher and towards a man with medical or anatomical knowledge. But knowing the killer had surgical training was not the same as knowing who lay on the tables. The whole point of the mutilation had been to make identification impossible. 4 separate lines of scientific work, several of them used in a British court for the first time, undid that intention. The first was photographic superimposition. Ruxton had had a studio portrait taken of Isabella, wearing a dress and a tiara. Brash and Stobie photographed one of the reconstructed skulls in exactly the orientation of that portrait, then laid a transparency of the skull over the picture. The contours of the two matched, feature for feature. To test the method rather than trust it, they took a second skull and photographed it the same way against the same portrait. That one did not fit. The control strengthened the match because it showed the technique could tell one face from another. The second was insect evidence, the first time it had been used in a British murder case. Dr. Alexander Gow-Mearns of Glasgow examined maggots taken from the remains, identified them as the larvae of the bluebottle, Calliphora vicina, and, from the stage of their development, judged them to be 12 to 14 days old. That aged the deposit in the ravine to the middle of September. It fixed a flaw beneath the timeline, and it contradicted the account Ruxton would come to give. The third was fingerprinting, in circumstances that had never been attempted before. Bertie Hammond worked with the skin from a thumb of one of the bodies, photographed the ridge detail, and compared it against prints lifted from inside 2 Dalton Square. He found 16 points of agreement. The Glasgow record places that thumb with body number 2, and it is enough to say that Hammond matched a print from the ravine to a print from Ruxton's own house, without insisting here on which of the 2 women the thumb had belonged to. The fourth was a matter of physical fit. Plaster casts were taken of the reconstructed left feet, and those casts were fitted into shoes that had belonged to Isabella and to Mary. They fitted, and a denture recovered from one of the bodies was matched to Isabella's dental records. Generally, the investigators took body number 1 to be Mary Rogerson and body number 2 to be Isabella Ruxton, and the superimposition and the denture belonged to the second body. While the men of science rebuilt the victims, the wrappings rebuilt the geography, and every thread of it led back to Lancaster. One parcel had been wrapped in a newspaper, a slip edition of the Sunday Graphic dated the 15th of September, 1935. A slip edition was a special local printing, and this one had circulated only in the Lancaster and Morecambe district. Whoever had wrapped that parcel had bought that paper there. The blouse was identified by Jessie Rogerson, Mary's mother, from a repair she had made herself under the left arm, on a garment she had picked up at a church bazaar. And the romper suit was identified by Mrs. Home from the Lake District, by the fresh elastic she had knotted into it with her own hands before sending Mary home. A ravine in Dumfriesshire, a special edition sold only around Morecambe Bay, a mother's mending, a friend's knot. The circle closed on one house. The Chief Constable of Lancaster, Captain Henry Vann, brought Ruxton in for questioning on the 11th of October. In truth, Ruxton had been coming to the police of his own accord for some time, complaining that the newspapers were ruining him, and he had handed the police a document of his own, a diary he had headed My Movements. It was meant to clear him. It did the opposite. A search of 2 Dalton Square found the house heavy with evidence. There was extensive bloodstaining on the stair carpet, in the bathroom, and on the landing. Witnesses spoke of him burning carpets and clothing in the yard. So thorough was the examination that parts of the house itself were taken to pieces and rebuilt in Glaister's Glasgow laboratory to be studied. Ruxton was questioned on the 11th of October. He spent his last night at home on the 12th. On the 13th of October, he was taken into custody and charged with the murder of Mary Rogerson. The charge in respect of Isabella followed on the 5th of November. The trial opened at the Manchester Winter Assizes in the High Court of Justice on Great Ducie Street on the 2nd of March, 1936, before Mr. Justice Singleton, and it ran for 11 days. More than 100 journalists came, and a special telephone switchboard was set up with open lines to the London papers. So great was the public appetite for it. And here, the Crown made a decision that shapes how this case must always be told. Although Ruxton had been charged over both women, the prosecution went to trial on one count only, the murder of Isabella. He was tried for one killing. He was never tried for the other. For the Crown appeared J.C. Jackson, King's Counsel, leading David Maxwell Fyfe and Hartley Shawcross, a young barrister who would one day be Britain's lead prosecutor at Nuremberg. For the defence appeared Norman Burkitt, King's Counsel, reckoned the finest criminal advocate of his generation, with Philip Kershaw and Edward Singer. More than 100 witnesses were called, and something like 200 exhibits produced. Jackson put the case plainly. A violent, jealous man had strangled the woman he called his wife in a fit of rage, and then had to kill the young servant because she had seen it done. Glaister and Brash carried the jury through the reconstruction and the superimposition, the maggots and the feet and the denture. Burkitt fought the identification because it was the only ground on which the case could be fought. If the Crown could not prove whose bodies these were, then it could not prove that Isabella was dead at all, still less that her husband had killed her. He pressed the scientists hard on the certainty of their methods. But the forensic case did not break. Ruxton went into the witness box himself and gave evidence over 2 days, emotional and voluble and endlessly talking, and he denied all of it. Burkitt reminded the jury that a verdict of guilty could never be undone, and that the burden lay on the Crown to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt. Mr. Justice Singleton's summing up ran for several hours, and he told the jury that the case against the prisoner was as strong a circumstantial case as could be imagined. The jury of 12 men retired. They were back in about an hour. Their verdict was guilty, returned on the 13th of March, 1936. Ruxton, a superstitious man, is said to have marked that it was a Friday the 13th. The judge put on the black cap and told him, in words the record preserves only in substance, that he had been convicted on evidence that could leave no doubt in any mind. And then Singleton did a rare thing. He excused every member of that jury from jury service for the rest of their lives because of what they had been made to look at. Ruxton lodged notice of appeal the following day. It was heard on the 27th of April, 1936, before the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Hewitt. Burkitt argued that the judge had misdirected the jury. Lord Hewitt dismissed the appeal and said, in substance, that there was nothing in the summing up even faintly resembling a misdirection. In Lancaster, meanwhile, something extraordinary was happening. A petition for mercy was got up on Ruxton's behalf, and it gathered around 10,000 signatures. Many of them were his own patients, people who had sat in his surgery on Dalton Square and could not square the doctor they knew with the man in the dock. The Home Secretary, Sir John Simon, considered it and refused a reprieve. Buck Ruxton was hanged at 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday the 12th of May, 1936, at Strangeways Prison in Manchester. The executioner was Thomas Pierrepoint, assisted by Robert Wilson. The dry particulars survive in the prison record. He stood 5 feet 7.5 inches, weighed 9 stone 11, and was given a drop of 7 feet 11 inches. A large crowd gathered outside the walls, and among them stood men and women who had come to demonstrate against the death penalty itself. He was buried in an unmarked grave inside the prison. The following Sunday, the News of the World printed a confession. Ruxton had written it on the 14th of October, 1935, the day before he was charged, sealed it, and sold it to the paper for £3,000 to help pay for his defence. In it, he admitted that he had killed Isabella in a rage, and that he had killed Mary because she had seen him do it. His 3 children, the eldest only about 6 and the youngest about 2, were taken into foster care. They were never harmed, and they pass out of the story here. The house did not pass out of it so easily. The entire contents of 2 Dalton Square were sold at auction on the 4th of December, 1935, 3 months after the murders and 5 months before the execution. The building itself could not be sold as a home. Who would live in it? It stood empty for something like 40 years, and it gathered around itself the sort of talk such houses always gather, of a haunting, of children daring one another to climb inside. That is local legend and nothing more, and it is offered here as legend. In the end, Lancaster City Council took the building over as offices, which is what it is to this day. The reason the case is remembered and taught lies not in the horror of it, but in the science that answered the horror. Glaister and Brash published their full anatomical report. The volume on the trial in the notable British Trials series, edited by R.H. Blundell, appeared in 1937. Photographic superimposition, the aging of insect larvae, the painstaking reconstruction methods worked out in Edinburgh and Glasgow, all of these passed from this one case into the ordinary practice of forensic medicine. A man had cut 2 women to pieces precisely so that they could never be named, and the naming of them founded a science. There is a final turn, and it belongs to our own time. In November of 2023, it emerged that the University of Edinburgh still held the skulls and other bones of both women, kept in the Sidney Smith collection, boxed in a vault alongside the papers of the case, retained across nearly 90 years for research. The university did not know whether Ruxton's children had ever been told how their parents had died, and chose not to approach the family in private. Instead, it made a public appeal through the BBC for relatives of Isabella Ruxton and Mary Rogerson to come forward. They were found, and the remains of the 2 women, so long unburied, were at last laid to rest. In September of 2025, 90 years after the murders, Lancaster City Museum opened an exhibition it called Belle and Mary, the 2 Dalton Square murders. It was built deliberately around the 2 women, and not around the man who killed them. The verdict has never been seriously doubted. Ruxton's own confession, printed the Sunday after he hanged, said what the jury had already found. What has changed is where the light falls. For a long time, this was the case of the doctor who took 2 people apart on Dalton Square. It is worth remembering, at the end, that it was really the case of Isabella Kerr, who drove her own car and meant to run her own business, and of Mary Rogerson from Morecambe, who was 20, and who came home from the Lake District with a bundle of second-hand clothes for the children she looked after. This channel tells one forgotten British case at a time, drawn out of the record and set down where it happened. There are more of them coming, cases that made law, cases that made science, cases that 100 years of newspapers got half wrong. This is a new channel, and it grows when you back it early. If you would like to see the next one, subscribing costs you nothing and helps more than you might think. Thank you for listening to the end.